Let's bring in our panel now. Catherine Woollard joins me from Brussels. She's the Secretary General of the European Council for Refugees and Exiles. In London, we have Sebastian Leape. He was a volunteer at the Moria camp last year. And Costas Panayotakis is a sociology professor at New York City College of Technology. I thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmaker. Sebastian, let me start with you. Our correspondent found refugees and migrants in terrible conditions on Lesvos. Whose responsibility is that chaos?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. As you said, when I was there in the summer, the conditions were truly awful. And I've been on the phone this morning with refugees and volunteers who say that sadly the situation is still very bad. We have over 5,000 refugees in Moria camp alone, and 127 of those families are in small little sports tents worth no more than 30 euros from a local sports store, and are totally inadequate for the cold, snowy conditions they face at the moment. So the conditions that I saw in terms of poor sanitation, inadequate shelter, widespread violence, inadequate food is still very much ongoing today, which is disappointing given the coverage that the camp has received in the past few months from major news outlets. And so in terms of who's responsible, I think it's very easy to see that the immediate culprit is the Greek government for allowing these conditions to spiral out of control in Moria. And I think here we have a lack of political will more than practical capacity, because you see just down the road from Moria at Karatepe, a camp that is run to a much higher standard. And that is run by the local municipality there on Lesbos. So the Greeks certainly have the ability to run these camps decently, but they're not able to. But they're not the only ones to blame.
So let's just pick up on that. Costas, do you agree with that the Greek government's not fully committed to solving this?
Well, I think the Greek government has part of the responsibility, but I think the situation that refugees face is also, the product of a much bigger problem, and this is the problem the European Union itself has a responsibility, and I would say the Western world more generally. I mean, you have horrible ways of treating refugees, even in superpowers like the United States. And these are the countries, of course, which through their entanglements in the region and geopolitical rivalries have created the root cause to begin with. So without trying to absolve the Greek government for any responsibility it may have, we need to keep the broader picture in mind, and we need to recognize that there is a rise of far-right anti-immigrant feeling throughout the European continent, and even in countries that have done much less to receive refugees than Greece has.
Right. So, Catherine Woollard, a couple of summers ago when everybody was calling this a crisis and all of us were talking about it weekly, and Sebastian's right, there's been a lack of coverage. We are responsible for this. Everybody's responsible for this. We're all to blame in that sense, right? Because we're not raising awareness, even though the numbers are terrible. A couple summers ago, Catherine, people were looking at solutions. We had the EU-Turkey deal. We looked at all these different solutions at stemming the flow of these people going to Europe and basically making life better for people fleeing desperation. Was it factored in that we were going to reach a stage where a lot of people were going to be in these dystopian dead ends, like a lot of these islands, where people are stuck and in crummy conditions? Was that part of the plan?
Indeed, yes. And I would say in terms of your question about responsibility, that lies also with the EU and with other European countries. The strategy in place since 2016 has been one based on the idea of containment within Greece and containment on the islands. The situation in the islands arises directly from the EU-Turkey deal that you mentioned, the idea being that people would be contained there and then returned to Turkey. Our argument currently is that that measure was supposed to be temporary and exceptional. It's now time to rethink it, focus on asylum systems, building up asylum systems in Europe and including in Greece. I would note also that we see the member states refused to adequately relocate people out of Greece. So this was a lack of solidarity with Greece that was facing this large increase in arrivals. Instead, we now see a situation where certain member states are reinstating Dublin transfers, whereby people are transferred back to Greece. So all of this is exacerbating the situation. I think the way out of it is to focus on a longer-term strategy of making asylum function in Europe, including in Greece, where there are long-standing problems.
Okay, so Catherine, as I try to understand how this works practically and how it works on the political level, you'll be sitting with representatives of member states in Brussels and telling them, this is a mess, this is not sustainable, this is a problem. Are they listening to you?
I think the situation on the Greek islands is in fact well known in Brussels. There have been many cases documenting exactly what's going on, carried out by NGOs, by the Greek organisations, by witnesses there. Unfortunately, some policymakers believe it's a price worth paying to stem the flow of arrivals to Europe. We disagreed with that in 2016, believing that this strategy was unethical and indeed unlawful. We certainly consider now that it's time to rethink. I think the other issue here is that underlying the situation in Greece is the unfairness of the EU asylum system, which places responsibility on the countries of first arrival. As you're no doubt aware, negotiations have been going on for 2 years on a reform of that asylum policy. That needs to continue, but in a way that it leads to better responsibility sharing, which would be fairer both for asylum seekers and also people at the countries at the EU's borders, so that this idea of disproportionate responsibility for those countries is reduced. And that is one of the reasons why Greece has for many years not complied with the EU asylum law, and it's partly why we see a similar situation in Italy, where the perception is that the system is unfair.
Right. So Costas, I mean, in many ways, parallels even with the financial crisis, right? It's a price worth paying. We'll bail out the banks and the Greeks can maybe pay for it. Or, you know, okay, we're going to stem the flow of refugees. Maybe it's a price worth paying, not us, but the Greeks and other Mediterranean or Balkan nations will do that. Help me understand, Costas, how within Greece the general public thinks about taking in refugees at this moment in time at the beginning of 2019. What's the zeitgeist?
Well, I think at the beginning of the crisis, there was a significant amount for solidarity for refugees. And of course, many Greeks themselves were refugees as a result of the wars between Greece and Turkey in the early 20th century, including in Lesvos, many of whose residents came over from, in 1922 after the war between Greece and Turkey. As the situation is dragging on, there is a sense that the cost or the burden of supporting the refugees is unevenly distributed even within Greece. And I'm afraid that one of the results of that is that this provides a sort of fertile ground for the further rise of the far right in Greece. And of course, the economic crisis did a lot to further the rise of this marginal neo-Nazi party, very extreme and violent. That's now the third largest party in the Greek parliament. So I'm afraid that the situation may sort of provide fertile ground for the further strengthening of this party, especially in areas like Lesbos, who have had to shoulder much of the cost of the crisis, because these terrible conditions, they primarily affect refugees, but to a large extent, they also affect Greeks who live in the vicinity.
Yeah. So, Sebastian, when you have the rise of Golden Dawn, or Golden Dawn sustaining itself on the fact that refugees are coming in and this idea that we have to bear the burden, Europe's burdens, it doesn't help things, does it?
Absolutely not. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning here is the changing nature of who's coming in. So a lot of people still perceive this to be a Syrian refugee crisis. But last year, there were actually more Afghans then Syrians coming in, with Iraqis a close third. So this is very much now a multi-country crisis, which is the result of instability across the Middle East. And we need to remember that that is the original source. And so the long-term goal is to create stability in those countries and those regions so that people don't have to flee in the first place. Everything beyond that is very much a second best. But I agree that the rise of the far right across Europe is why we're here in the first place, why the EU-Turkey deal was signed back in 2016, because the EU Commission was under that intense political pressure to stem the flow. And so that adds a very toxic and dangerous element to the political response to this.
Okay, so Catherine, in a nutshell, if these people are not willing to go back to Afghanistan or to Syria and other places, such as those countries that are conflict-ridden, and there are no member states willing to actively take them in, are they just going to be stuck on these islands indefinitely?
No, first let's note that most of the people arriving in Greece are refugees and they're being recognised as people entitled to international protection. This means they cannot go back. And that means that firstly member states should be relocating them. If they refuse to do so, then they're applying for asylum in Greece. And we see record numbers of first-time asylum applications in Greece. About 59,000 in 2017, and we'll see a similar number in 2018 when we have the full figures. This means the focus has to switch to supporting the asylum system in Greece so that they can have, firstly, decent reception conditions, secondly, fair asylum decision making, and then a piece that has sometimes been lacking in Greece, integration measures to support these new communities who will end up staying longer term in Greece. I think for the will to be there on the side of the Greek government to carry out these measures that it is also legally obliged to carry out, some show of support from the other member states in terms of restarting significant relocation would go some way towards that. And above all, I think we would like to see the EU switch its focus away from trying to make the EU-Turkey deal work. This element of returning people to Turkey is not working, it needs to be reconsidered, and to focus their efforts on supporting asylum systems to function within the EU, because the numbers are manageable. Properly managed, we can avoid this kind of awful, scandalous situation that has arisen.
Right. Sebastian, just for example, you're sitting in London. Nobody's talking about this, are they? They're talking about Brexit and they're talking about all of that, right? So how are we going to get people to have the appetite to even try and rethink this, Sebastian?
Well, you're quite right. That's one of the great tragedies of Brexit, is the opportunity cost in terms of all the other burning policy questions we should be and could be discussing that have been squeezed out. But while we're not talking about the refugee crisis, immigration is bubbling below the surface of this Brexit debate and is bubbling across Europe. And I think that makes it a very difficult topic to bring up and to make political progress on. For now, we still don't, while France and Germany remain in the hands of relatively centrist parties, I think there is room to make progress, and the EU should push to do so. But there's that real risk of a rise of the far right beyond its current state, which will make progress even harder.
Sebastian, Catherine and Costas, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. I've got to move on.